In January 1945, when Soviet troops entered Auschwitz, they found something that shocked even hardened soldiers: children. Some could not stand, some could not speak, and many bore marks and memories that would never fully heal. These were survivors of a system that had decided their lives were unworthy from the moment they were born. Their presence revealed a story far larger than the liberation of one camp. It exposed a vast network where children were transported, selected, and forced to endure conditions no child should ever face. To understand how this happened, we must step back and examine the ideology that made children targets in a system built on racial hatred.
The Nazi regime's persecution of children was not incidental but ideological. The Nazis advocated eliminating children of unwanted or dangerous groups as part of their concept of racial struggle or as a measure of preventative security. This calculated approach meant that children faced destruction not for any action they had taken, but simply for their existence. Jewish children were particularly targeted, but the Nazi regime also focused on ethnically Polish children, Romani children, and children with mental or physical disabilities. The reasoning behind this systematic destruction was both immediate and long-term. Nazi ideology demanded the complete elimination of what they termed undesirable populations, and children represented the future of these groups. The fate of children varied based on age and circumstances. Young children, typically those under the age of 12, were usually sent directly to killing facilities upon arrival at death camps. Adolescents aged 13 to 18 have a greater chance of survival as they could be selected for forced labor, though their long-term survival remained rare as most succumbed to exhaustion, disease, and malnutrition. The Nazi euthanasia program, known as Action T4, specifically targeted children with disabilities even before the war's major deportations began. Children with disabilities were subjected to fatal methods, including carbon monoxide exposure, starvation, phenol injections to the heart, or hanging. This program claimed thousands of young lives and established the infrastructure and personnel that would later operate the death camps. Beyond the camps themselves, children faced violence in numerous forms. Nazi forces committed large-scale collective punishment on civilians, including children, throughout occupied territories. Massacres occurred at locations such as Kragujevac in Serbia, where over 250 high school students were killed. Lidice in Czechoslovakia, where over 80 children died, and numerous villages across Ukraine, Belarus, and Greece.
The journey to the concentration camps began in ghettos, villages, and cities across occupied Europe. Families were crammed into cattle cars, sometimes for days, without adequate food, water, or sanitation. Children witnessed the deaths of relatives during these transports, and many arrived at the camps already traumatized by what they had seen. Upon arrival at camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau, prisoners faced the selection process. SS physicians would point in different directions, making split-second decisions about who would live temporarily and who would die immediately. Camp authorities sent the majority of children directly to the facilities used for mass killing upon arrival at Auschwitz-Birkenau and other killing centers. The moment of arrival often meant the permanent separation of families. Children were torn from their parents' arms, their cries echoing across the selection platform. Janusz Korczak, director of an orphanage in the Warsaw Ghetto, made a different choice. When the children under his care were selected for deportation to the Treblinka killing center, Korczak refused to abandon them and accompanied them, sharing their fate. Some children attempted to increase their chances by lying about their age. Tomi Shacham, who was 11 years old when he arrived at Auschwitz with his family, was told by his parents to claim he was 9 and a half. This small deception allowed him to remain with his mother for 2 additional days before she was taken away, leaving him alone in the children's barracks. The selection process revealed the arbitrary nature of survival. Elie Wiesel, who later became a renowned author and human rights advocate, survived his initial selection only because he claimed to be 18 rather than his actual age of 15. His mother and younger sister were sent immediately to their deaths. For twins, the selection process held a different fate. The call of "Twins, twins!" rang out across the platform as SS guards searched for matching pairs. 10-year-old Eva Moses and her twin sister Miriam were separated from their mother at Auschwitz-Birkenau, never seeing her again. The twins were taken to special barracks, marked for a different kind of horror. For the children who survived the initial selection and were registered in the camps, daily life became a desperate struggle for survival. The fate of child and youth prisoners was no different in principle from that of adult. They suffered from hunger and cold, were used as laborers, and were subject to punishment and brutal treatment. At the end of 1943, separate barracks were established for children above the age of 2, but these did not differ in any way from the barracks assigned to adults. The wooden bunks were cramped, with multiple children forced to share sleeping spaces. Sanitation was almost non-existent, and disease spread rapidly through the crowded quarters. The camp authorities made no provisions for the special needs of children. They did not even distribute milk or appropriate food rations for infants, essentially sentencing them to starvation. The meals provided consisted of watery soup, small portions of bread, and occasionally a thin slice of margarine or sausage. Children received the same inadequate rations as adults, despite their growing bodies' need for proper nutrition. After examining 180 children aged 6 months to 14 years, a forensic medical commission reported that the majority were suffering from diseases acquired in the camp. 60% showed vitamin deficiency and overall weakening of their bodies, and 40% had tuberculosis. These statistics, compiled after liberation, revealed the systematic neglect and abuse children endured. Children tried to maintain some semblance of childhood even in these conditions. Prisoner physicians, nurses, and musicians organized lectures, concerts, and activities when possible. Older girls took care of younger children, creating surrogate family structures. Educators attempted to continue schooling in secret, teaching children about their heritage and maintaining hope for a future beyond the barbed wire. The winter months brought additional suffering. Children lacked adequate clothing and footwear. Frostbite was common, and many succumbed to pneumonia and other cold-related illnesses. The summer heat, combined with poor sanitation, led to typhus and dysentery outbreaks that claimed young lives with terrifying speed. Work assignments varied depending on the camp and the child's age. Adolescents were put to hard labor, carrying heavy stones, digging ditches, or working in factories attached to the camps. Younger children sometimes avoided work details, but this meant they had less opportunity to obtain extra food rations that occasionally came with labor assignments. Among the most disturbing aspects of children's experiences in concentration camps were the medical experiments conducted by SS physicians. These researchers used children, especially twins, in concentration camps for experiments that often resulted in the deaths of the subjects. The most infamous of these physicians was Josef Mengele, an SS officer with doctorates in anthropology and medicine. Mengele was assigned to Auschwitz in May 1943, where he saw the opportunity to conduct medical research on human subjects. His experiments focused primarily on twins, with little or no regard for the health or safety of the victims. Most of the twins Mengele studied were children between the ages of 2 and 16. Historian estimates suggest Mengele may have studied as many as 1,000 sets of twins.
Over 3,000 twins became victims of Mengelé's deadly genetic experiments at Auschwitz. The Mengele twins existed in a paradoxical situation. They received nominal protection from some aspects of camp life, were not selected for the facilities used for mass killing, lived in separate quarters, and were given additional food and medical care. However, this protection came at a terrible price. One prisoner assigned to care for Jewish twins later described how children reacted emotionally and physically to their treatment. Blood samples were collected first from fingers and then from arteries, sometimes 2 or 3 times from the same victims. The children screamed and tried to protect themselves from being touched, with personnel resorting to force. Drops were placed in their eyes, resulting in severe swelling, burning sensations, and extreme pain. Mengele performed procedures such as unnecessary amputation of limbs and intentionally infected one twin with typhus or another disease, then transfused the blood of the infected twin into the other. Many of his subjects died while undergoing these procedures. After experiments were complete, twins were sometimes killed and their bodies dissected. Ava Moses, one of the surviving twins, later recalled her experiences. She described sitting naked for hours while her body was repeatedly measured and compared to her sister's Miriam's. She endured injections of unknown substances that caused severe reactions throughout her body. The psychological trauma of these experiences haunted survivors for the rest of their lives. Mengele also studied people with different colored irises, known as heterochromia, and investigated the gangrenous disease of the face called noma, which was particularly endemic among Roma and Sinti prisoners in Auschwitz. When there was an outbreak of noma among Romani children in the camp, Mengele assigned prisoner physicians to study it. The prisoner physicians discovered how to cure the normally fatal disease, but all of the children who were cured were eventually murdered. Prisoner physicians were forced to assist in these experiments or face their own deaths. Dr. Miklos Nishli, a pathologist, was compelled to prepare specimens and perform autopsies for Mengele's laboratory. Nishli recalled one night where Mengele personally killed 14 twins through chloroform injection. The supposed scientific justification for these experiments centered on Nazi racial ideology. Mengele and his colleagues sought to identify physical and biochemical markers that could definitively identify members of specific races, believing this was vital for preserving what they viewed as German racial superiority. The suffering of children was considered acceptable in pursuit of these pseudoscientific goals.
Available documents indicate that at least 700 children were born in Auschwitz-Birkenau. These births occurred under the most dire circumstances imaginable, with pregnant women receiving no special care or provisions. Until mid-1943, all children born in Auschwitz, regardless of their origins, were murdered, usually by phenol injection or drowning. Later, non-Jewish newborns were allowed to live and were entered in camp records as new arrivals, with prisoner numbers tattooed on their thighs or buttocks. Due to the terrible conditions in the camp, few of these infants survived long. Children born to Jewish mothers were murdered until the end of October 1944, when the SS halted the mass destruction operations. Pregnant Jewish women who arrived at the camps typically faced immediate selection for the facilities used for mass killing. One prisoner doctor, Olga Lengyel, revealed the horrifying reality of childbirth in the camps. Mengele would supervise the birth of a child with meticulous care, only to send both mother and child to their deaths within an hour. Zofia Wereluk represents an extraordinary case. She was born in Auschwitz just 2 weeks before the camp's liberation, with her mother having been sent to the camp 4 months pregnant. Both mother and daughter survived to see freedom, a rare occurrence among the countless pregnancies that ended in tragedy within the camp walls. While Jewish children formed the largest group of child victims, other categories of children also suffered terribly in the concentration camp system. Romani children were targeted based on their ethnicity, and approximately 800 children of Jehovah's Witnesses were taken away from their families. At Auschwitz, a specific section known as the Zigeunerlager housed Romani families. Mengele conducted an anthropological study of the Romani men, women, and children in this section. Unlike other areas of the camp where families were immediately separated, the Romani family camp initially allowed families to remain together, though they faced the same brutal conditions and violence as other prisoners. Jehovah's Witness children typically expressed defiance to the Nazi regime's attempts to make them act against their beliefs. These children and their families could have escaped persecution by renouncing their faith, but many refused, maintaining their religious convictions even in the face of severe consequences. Polish children faced particular dangers during the occupation. The total number of Polish children under the age of 16 who died in Poland is estimated at 1,800,000, with historians believing 1,200,000 were ethnically Polish and 600,000 were Polish Jewish. Many Polish children were deported to concentration camps following uprisings or as part of collective punishment operations. In the SS initiative to retrieve what they termed Aryan blood, hundreds of children in occupied Poland and the occupied Soviet Union were kidnapped and transferred to Germany to be adopted by families deemed racially suitable. These children, if they appeared to have Germanic features, were stolen from their parents and placed with German families to be raised as Germans, their true identities erased. Despite their vulnerability, many children found ways to resist and survive. Children smuggled food and medicine into ghettos, trading their personal possessions for these essential goods. Young people displayed remarkable resourcefulness, using their small size to slip through gaps in fences or hide in spaces adults could not access. Children and youth movements later escaped ghettos to join underground resistance activities, such as Soviet partisan units, while others formed their own units to harass German occupiers. Some children escaped with parents or relatives to family camps run by partisans in forests. Others had to flee alone, navigating dangerous territories without adult protection. Many Jewish children were forced to adopt false identities for their own safety, obtaining false papers that usually came from anti-Nazi resistance to pretend to be Aryans. This survival strategy imposed major security risks, as Nazi authorities closely examined documents in their search for Jews in hiding. Children had to maintain their false identities constantly, never revealing their true names or backgrounds, even to potential friends. The Kindertransport rescue missions represented organized efforts to save children. Between 1938 and 1940, these operations brought approximately 10,000 refugee Jewish children to Great Britain from Nazi Germany and German-occupied territories. These children escaped with their lives, but faced the trauma of separation from their families, most of whom they would never see again. In France, almost the entire Protestant population of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, along with many Catholic priests, nuns, and lay Catholics, hid Jewish children in the town from 1942 to 1944. Such acts of courage by non-Jews saved thousands of young lives, though they represented only a small fraction of the children who needed help. Red Army soldiers from the 322nd Rifle Division arrived at Auschwitz on January 27, 1945, at 3 p.m. They found approximately 7,000 prisoners who had been left behind, most seriously ill from the effects of their imprisonment, with the majority being middle-aged adults or children younger than 15. Among the liberated prisoners were 180 children, with 52 of them being under 8 years of age. These children had survived because they were wanted for medical research rather than being immediately killed. Most were twins or had other characteristics that made them subjects of scientific interest. The Soviet soldiers were shocked by what they discovered. Red Army General Vasily Petrenko remarked that while he had seen people dying every day, he was shocked by the Nazis' indescribable hatred toward inmates who had turned into living skeletons. The liberating forces found 600 corpses, 370,000 men's suits, 837,000 articles of women's clothing, and 7 tons of human hair. The children's physical condition was dire. Many were sick with tuberculosis and eye infections. Some could barely walk. Their bodies bore the marks of their experiences, tattoos on their arms, scars from experiments, and the effects of severe malnutrition and disease. Tomi Shaham befriended the Soviet soldiers after liberation and took them on a tour around Auschwitz, pointing out what each building was for. His ability to serve as a guide revealed both his resilience and the terrible knowledge these children had acquired during their imprisonment. The majority of liberated child prisoners left Auschwitz in separate groups in February and March 1945, with most going to charitable institutions or children's homes. Only a few were reunited with their parents. The majority, who were Jewish, spent many years in orphanages, children's homes, and children's villages in Poland, Israel, the Soviet Union, and other countries until they reached the age of majority. The search for family members began immediately. Some children left notes at train stations with their names and the names of their parents and grandparents, hoping surviving relatives would find them. Organizations worked to compile lists of surviving children and circulate them to displaced persons camps and Jewish communities worldwide.
The liberation marked the end of their imprisonment, but not the end of their suffering. Child survivors faced numerous challenges as they attempted to rebuild their lives. Many were orphans, their entire families destroyed. They had missed years of education and normal childhood development. The psychological trauma of their experiences would remain with them forever. Some survivors, like Imre Varsani, did not speak about Auschwitz for 60 years because they felt ashamed of their survival. Survivor guilt haunted many who questioned why they had lived when so many others, including siblings and parents, had perished. Medical issues plagued survivors throughout their lives. The experiments left permanent damage. Ephraim Reichenberg and his brother had been subjected to injections in their necks during Mengeles experiments. A year after the war, his brother died a painful death, and in 1967, Reichenberg's throat and gullet were removed. He spent the rest of his life speaking through a voice amplifier, a constant reminder of the abuse he had endured as a child. The twins who survived Mengeles experiments faced particular challenges. Many developed medical conditions later in life that they attributed to the procedures they had undergone. The psychological impact of being treated as laboratory subjects, of watching other children disappear and never return, created lasting trauma. Despite these challenges, many survivors demonstrated remarkable resilience. They built new lives, created families, and pursued careers. Some became educators, ensuring that future generations would know what had happened. Others became activists for human rights and against genocide. Eva Moses Kor, who survived Mengeles twin experiments with her sister Miriam, founded the Candles Holocaust Museum and Education Center in Indiana. She became a prominent speaker about the Holocaust and forgiveness, though her views on forgiveness for Nazi perpetrators sparked considerable debate within the survivor community. The search for justice continued for decades. Mengele escaped prosecution for his crimes. He fled westward as Soviet forces approached, eventually making his way to South America. He lived under various aliases in Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil, dying in 1979 after suffering a stroke while swimming. His body was not identified until 1985, denying survivors the opportunity to see him face justice.
The survivors who could speak about their experiences provided crucial testimony. Their accounts documented the crimes committed against children and ensured that the world would not forget. Organizations like the USC Shoah Foundation collected thousands of video testimonies, preserving survivor voices for future generations. The famous photograph of children at liberation, showing young prisoners behind barbed wire wearing adult-size prison jackets, became one of the most iconic images of the Holocaust. Many of the children in that photograph have been identified and have shared their stories. Gabriel Neumann, Bracha Katz, Tomi Shacham, Erika Dohan, Jacob Schillach, Marta Weiss, and Eva Slonim were all children photographed at liberation who survived to tell their stories. In 2005, 60 years after liberation, 6 of these survivors living in Israel participated in a ceremony in Poland marking the anniversary. They stood next to enlarged copies of the original photographs, their aged faces, testimony to the lives they had built despite their traumatic beginnings. Tomi Shacham reflected on his role as a survivor. Perhaps because I helped younger children in the bloc, I became a teacher and an educator. I believe that it is possible and important to teach students and young people about the Shoah. There is no need to tell the most horrifying stories. That could make them recoil. But it is important to tell what happened, and also to emphasize how the survivors raised themselves from the ashes and tried to overcome what had happened to them, build families, work, create, and live. The establishment of International Holocaust Remembrance Day on January 27, the anniversary of Auschwitz's liberation, ensures annual global recognition of the Holocaust. Museums, memorials, and educational programs work to ensure that the experiences of child victims are not forgotten.
The systematic targeting and destruction of children in the Nazi concentration camp system represents one of humanity's greatest moral failures. The murder of 1.5 million children was not a tragic byproduct of war, but a deliberate policy rooted in ideology and hatred. The experiences of children in concentration camps reveal several critical truths about the Holocaust. First, the Nazi regime's evil was total and absolute. They showed no mercy, even to the most vulnerable members of society. The murder of infants, the brutal treatment of young children, and the use of children as experimental subjects demonstrated a complete abandonment of basic human morality. Second, these crimes were systematic and bureaucratic. Children were registered, tattooed, and tracked through elaborate record-keeping systems. Their destruction was organized and efficient, carried out by educated professionals, including physicians, administrators, and military personnel. This reveals how ordinary people can participate in extraordinary evil when operating within structures that normalize atrocity. Third, the testimony of child survivors demonstrates the resilience of the human spirit. Despite experiencing horrors that should have destroyed them, many survivors went on to build meaningful lives. They became parents, professionals, educators, and advocates. Their ability to find hope, meaning, and purpose after such trauma stands as a powerful counterpoint to the forces that tried to destroy them. The concentration camp system also reveals the dangers of unchecked hatred and dehumanization. The Nazis first defined certain groups as less than human, then used this designation to justify any treatment of them. The path from prejudice to genocide was marked by incremental steps, each one making the next seem more acceptable. The international community's failure to act more decisively to prevent or stop the Holocaust carries lessons for subsequent generations. The world knew, at least in part, what was happening, but did not intervene effectively. This failure contributed to millions of deaths and demonstrated the consequences of indifference to evil. The experiences of children in Nazi concentration camps remain relevant today. Genocide did not end with World War II. Subsequent atrocities in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and elsewhere have claimed more lives, including countless children. The patterns of dehumanization, hatred, and systematic violence persist. Anti-Semitism, which fueled the Nazi persecution of Jewish children, continues in various forms worldwide. Attacks on Jewish communities, the spread of Holocaust denial, and the resurgence of far-right extremism demonstrate that the ideologies that enabled the Holocaust have not been eradicated. The treatment of refugee children, separated families, and children in conflict zones today echoes some of the patterns from the past. While circumstances differ greatly from the Nazi concentration camp system, any society's treatment of vulnerable children serves as a measure of its moral character. Education about the Holocaust, including the experiences of children, serves multiple purposes. It honors the memory of victims, provides testimony to historical truth, and offers lessons about the consequences of hatred and indifference. Survivors have emphasized the importance of teaching these histories to prevent future atrocities. However, studies show that knowledge about the Holocaust is eroding, particularly among younger generations. This makes the work of education and remembrance increasingly urgent as the generation of survivors ages and their direct testimony will soon no longer be available. The child prisoners of the Nazi concentration system endured conditions that defy ordinary understanding. They were denied safety, identity, and childhood itself. Yet many who survived carried their experiences forward and chose to speak, teach, and remember. Their lives remind us that hatred is not abstract. It claims the smallest and most vulnerable first. The responsibility to remember their stories now belongs to us, so that the world never again allows children to be treated as anything less than human. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to the channel.